In the wake of the president's re-election, his team has been praised for its exceptionally detailed approach to identifying voters, reaching out to them, and, most importantly, getting them to the polls. Our own Chuck Todd recently talked to one of the men who made that happen.
Deep in the cyber heart of the president's winning campaign, a vast pool of data combined with a cutting-edge strategy to string together a massive coalition of supporters, not through one single message or ad, but through a continuous pattern of outreach. Needless to say, as we all know, it worked like a charm. According to the campaign's digital team, the president raised more than $500 million online. That's $100 million more than in 2008. Over the course of the race, the campaign's Facebook page went from 19 million likes to 45 million. The number of Twitter followers tripled to 23 million. The man at the center of this effort is the co-founder of Blue State Digital, Joe Rosbars. Joe joins me now for this look at how this whole thing was put together, and obviously we got a little bit of a taste in the media thanks to Sasha Eisenberg. And this is what he wrote in Victory Lab, which I'm sure you would agree with. Those who looked anew at the act of voting were beginning to think of it in an altogether different term. What if voting wasn't only a political act but a social one that took place in a lineal space between the public and private? What if toying with those expectations was key to turning a person into a voter? Explain that.
I would actually take it even one step further and talk about the fact that our campaign was communicating with our supporters and anybody who wanted to pull the lever for Barack Obama and saying, well, voting is the bare minimum here, but the civic act of organizing in your community, of reaching out to your friends and having that be a social act, chipping in, making phone calls, knocking on doors, is really the expectation and should be the standard for people's participation in the process.
One way I've tried to explain this to colleagues is sort of, how do you explain what you guys did? It feels as if you never wasted an outreach, meaning this: if you were making a polling phone call and you happen to get that number, you ID'd that person. And it could have been with the analytics team, regular polling team, through door knocking. But every time you had a contact with anybody in America, that was cataloged. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I think that there are interesting applications of both cataloging those interactions, but also realizing the data that you don't have. And so when we would ask someone to share the fact that early voting started today in Iowa with their friends on Facebook in Iowa, we could drop those Facebook friends into an email and say, hey, let them know that today's election day. But we could also say, we don't have phone numbers for these people. If you give them a call, you might be the only call they get in this election.
I had somebody else explain it to me that you knew everybody who was coming to an event, and if you didn't know, you found out why they were there, and then suddenly they became part of your community, not just somebody who attended an event.
Yeah, it's obviously a lot easier if everybody RSVPs online ahead of time. But if you showed up there, we took it on paper, we took it on an iPad, however we could get it to make sure you're looped into the campaign.
All right. In 2004, a lot of us in the media made a big deal of what the Bush campaign did. And at that time, that was considered cutting edge. They were micro-targeting, it was called. That was the buzzword of 2004. This feels like micro-targeting on steroids. How much of the 2004 campaign did you look at as somebody who said, boy, that's a good idea, watch me do it in the 21st century?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that, but it's also sort of mixing, to use the 2004 analogy, mixing a little bit of the Bush with a little bit of the Howard Dean. And so I think what we had was really smart technology and data meshed with the relationships and the notion that grassroots and organizing and ordinary people and their efforts can and should be at the center of a campaign. All
right. How does this get used going forward? I mean, I think that was always the question in 2008, and it didn't. I know there was attempts to be made, but you could argue, well, considering the political problems the president ran into on health care and some other things, 2010 didn't go so well for the president's party. Is this unique? How do you make the case that this isn't unique to Obama, that somehow what you've done can be transferred and done for other candidates, other political parties, frankly, other entities, policy fights, etc.?
Yeah, I don't think it can be necessarily transferred and say, okay, let's check the box and move on. I think the effort can be replicated. And so what it boils down to is the head of an organization, whether that's a candidate, an executive director of a nonprofit, or a CEO at a brand, needs to decide that they're going to have a meaningful relationship with the people who are most important to them, their supporters and the people they're trying to reach, in our case, voters. And to invest in that relationship technologically, but also ideologically, to make sure that you're spending the time and hearing what people are saying back to you and valuing their time and participation.
Looking back at what happened between 2008 and 10, if you were giving advice, what would you do differently that they didn't do then that could make this more effective for the president in a second term?
Look, I think the president has been pretty clear about, his approach to this. I think he said in his press conference after the 2010 election that, if there was one thing that they spend a little bit too much time trying to get business done in Washington and not as much time trying to change how business gets done in Washington. And I think that opening up the process and playing that outside game is something that, is a focus for him, and I'm excited to see how it plays out.
And how much more important now do you believe? When will social connectivity and interaction financially overtake television advertising as being more important for a political campaign?
I don't think it's necessarily about replacement. I think it's about, all of the above. I mean, it's not, we raised the most small dollar grassroots donations of any campaign in history.
You still spent more money on television than you did on this.
Yeah. And, on the Raise side, we raised more money than anybody ever has in a grassroots way, but we also fought the Romney campaign to
and you did big donors, right, as well.
On donations over $1,000. The difference is we raised the same amount of money, $1,000 and over, as the Romney campaign. The difference is for them, that was 2/3 of their money. For us, it was only 1/3.
Joe Rosebars, who's the co-founder of Blue State Digital, a big part of the analytics and everything that the Obama campaign built digitally in 2008 and 2012. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much.